Good morning. Bob Mueller opened his mouth yesterday, repeated what was in his report, but got Washington in a tizzy, all surrounding this issue of did the president obstruct justice, and is it time to impeach him? What was that performance all about? Let's ask Tom Fitton. He's the president of Judicial Watch. Joins us this morning in studio at an early hour. Thanks for coming in. 6 o'clock in the morning. Tom Fitton, good to have you.
You're welcome. Never resting, always watching.
Always watching. And as you were watching, what did you observe yesterday?
Well, I always thought the Mueller report was an abuse of power. 400 pages of really a whole lot of nothing. Certainly in terms of the obstruction, it was terribly abusive of the president, implying guilt when you're supposed to presume innocence. And, Mr. Mueller had this plausible deniability that, the staff wrote that. He was just running things. Well, he came in and doubled down on that corruption. He's now a participant in the political process to bring down the president.
He even glorified that staff yesterday. He talked about their morality and how great they were.
That's right. He went out of his way at the end of the statement to talk about all the great staff that worked for him for 2 years. I guess that didn't include Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, who he had to fire for bias.
Good point.
And ignoring Andrew Weissman, who was a pro-Clinton advocate, his number two. But he came in, suggested falsely, in my view, that the Justice Department policy of not indicting the president was the reason he wasn't indicted, when in fact he had already told Mr. Barr a month or two ago, oh no, that policy has nothing to do with whether or not we recommended prosecution. But then he pretended to say, well, we can't recommend prosecution, we can't exonerate him, which is another abuse of power, abuse of authority, and he suggested that Congress impeach him. Mm-hmm. Really terrible, and I frankly don't know why he was allowed to do it. I hope the Justice Department and Attorney General Barr didn't know what he was going to do ahead of time. And frankly, I think they've been too deferential to Mr. Mueller, both in allowing this gargantuan report to come out of the Justice Department with basically with their rubber stamp of approval, and then issue this statement, which, as I say, doubled down on the abuse.
Well, according to Fox News, Barr did know what he was going to say, the contents of what he was supposedly going to say. So let me ask you.
That was widely inappropriate for him to come out on the DOJ podium and make this political statement, because it was a political statement.
Well, that's my question I've been asking all morning. I was asking myself yesterday, why did he feel a need to make this statement? What was the point if he's allowing the document to speak for him and he has nothing else to say on this? Why did he do what he did yesterday?
Well, if you're looking at it through a partisan lens, he's seeing the momentum for impeachment dissipating. And he saw that Barr's analysis of his report, no collusion, no obstruction, taking hold in the public consciousness. So he's going to come out with a counterpoint and provide a political oomph to the idea of impeaching the president over non-obstruction.
Last night you were calling for Bob Mueller to be investigated. Who should do that investigation, and what do you want it to look like?
Well, typically when a Justice Department attorney violates the rules of ethics in the agency, the Office of Professional Responsibility would. Mm-hmm. And if I were Mr. Mueller, given the evident bias of his investigation, the abuses of his prosecution in terms of those early morning raids, the obstruction investigation that never should have been, I'd do it in the least an ethical audit of what went on during the Mueller operation. Investigating the investigators has got to include Mr. Mueller. Well, he had conflicts. Why did he continue as attorney as special counsel?
Yeah.
When did he know there was no collusion? If so, if he knew about it a year ago, as we allege, why did he allow this obstruction investigation to linger on to no good end?
Right. I mean, the public knowledge of an investigation prior to the into the President of the United States prior to the 2018 midterms is enough to create a spectacle that damages the Republican Party ahead of those midterms. And if he had known prior to the midterms that there was no collusion, why not say that and try and extract the Justice Department from the political process?
Exactly, and he embroiled on his way out the door the Justice Department again in the political process. by advocating essentially impeachment. Now, did he come out and say impeachment? No. But he said, well, we can't prosecute the president, and there's a branch of the government that can follow up in terms of accountability. And the Democrats saw that dog. It wasn't even a dog whistle. It was a I don't know what the
A vuvuzela.
it was a it was a siren. It was a siren, and all the appropriate Democrats echoed amen from the choir.
Tom, there was a lot of mixed analogies right there. I'm gonna tell you.
Give me another minute. I'll get three more in.
So to your point about the impeachment process, the call for impeachment had kind of slowed down. They were kind of veering away from this. Mueller comes out, puts gasoline on that fire to get it to roar again. I view this, and I could be wrong, and I'd like to get your opinion on this. I see this as the left trying to race to impeachment before they get any kind of investigation wrapped up, before they can come out and give to the American people, hey, this is what happened. Because questions of what you're just saying about why did this investigation keep going if he knew there was no collusion, why did the investigation keep going? Why wasn't it ended as soon as they knew there was no collusion? He doesn't want those questions answered. So if they can race to impeachment first and maybe keep it going through the election, that shadow of doubt. President Trump, it influences voters, low information voters, people who aren't embroiled in it like we are. It affects their vote, and maybe the president doesn't get reelected. This all goes away, and that information never comes out.
I think I think the opposite's going to be true because folks like us are more interested in what Mueller was up to as opposed to just focusing on what went on in 2016 before he was appointed. So now Mueller is a political player here, and he thinks he's shouldn't have to answer any more questions. I think this is going to embolden Republicans to bring him in and question him under oath, the way they did a Peter Strzok or a James Comey.
Meanwhile, like Richard Burr is sending subpoenas to Don Jr. How about you send a subpoena to Bob Mueller and force him to appear before the Senate and actually answer some questions?
Or Andrew Weissman, who we found through email traffic was doing the hiring of these anti-Trump partisans on that team. Boy, what an ugly situation. This president has been subjected to abuse on top of abuse by this Justice Department. Remember, Mr. Mueller is an employee of the Justice Department, and he abused that power again to attack an innocent man. The president is presumed innocent, and they tried to push this obstruction. They couldn't find it, and now Mueller's trying to excuse it and pretend the reason they didn't pursue it is because of DOJ policy. No, that isn't what the Attorney General of the United States thought. He thought the facts and the law didn't warrant it.
It's not the first time we've seen the Justice Department stray from its obligations. I want to talk about that in just a moment. Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton in studio with us this morning, reacting to Bob Mueller's statement yesterday and Washington's reaction to that as well. Tom, Rod Rosenstein appointed Bob Mueller to this task of special counsel. This after you had Jeff Sessions sit it out. He recused himself from the whole process, and now we ended up with all of this. But what's interesting about that is Rod Rosenstein recommended the firing of James Comey for indicting Hillary Clinton in the court of public opinion without actually recommending a prosecution. And then he appoints Bob Mueller to special counsel. And the conclusion now of Mueller's investigation is to do the very same thing, in a different way, of course, to President Trump, which is to indict him in the court of public opinion without actually accusing him of a crime.
In some ways, what Mueller did was worse than what James Comey did. Comey didn't accuse Mrs. Clinton of a crime. He used negative language about her conduct, but he said she didn't have what she did. No reasonable prosecutor would follow up with the prosecution, and her intent didn't rise to the level of crime. All that language,
right?
Okay, it was still an abuse because he did drag her through the mud a bit.
Yes,
because that wasn't his job. The evidence was there, but he's not supposed to be doing that as FBI director. He's not supposed to be doing any of that as FBI director. But Mueller came out and said that someone who he wasn't prosecuting, he didn't indict, suggested was guilty, and that the Justice Department couldn't exonerate him. I mean, that is turning our justice system on its head. That's the Alice in Wonderland approach to prosecutions. Verdict first, evidence later.
Why do you think William Barr allowed him to come out and make this statement if he did indeed know what he was going to say? Was it for fear of saying, well, look what happened. They won't let Bob Mueller say what he wants to say. They're muzzling Bob Mueller. What are they hiding?
I don't know if he understood the political ramifications of what he was going to do. That's the most charitable interpretation. Or he could have thought, as you suggested, Mary, that politically I can't get in the way of Mueller wanting to speak here. What am I going to do? Stop him from holding a press conference?
Right.
But, frankly, I think it's his job to police his agency. And this is something where he should have stopped Mr. Mueller from really causing a political firestorm inappropriately for a Justice Department official.
Yeah, I mean, clearly Barr is trying to navigate the chaos. We know he did he's doing an interview with CBS today, and he has that'll air in part tonight and then again tomorrow morning. So we're going to hear a lot from Bill Barr in the next 24 hours.
Well, there's a big dispute now. Because Mueller said, the reason I didn't do this is because the Justice Department, the reason we didn't get to the step of possibly indicting him was because of this Justice Department policy that they don't indict presidents. Barr said that isn't the discussion he had with Mr. Mueller in front of several witnesses, where that opinion was not the guiding light in terms of his ultimate decision not to recommend an indictment. And you know what, frankly, if the DOJ policy was to not indict sitting presidents for conduct as president in the exercise of their duties, then why the heck did they spend a year and a half, investigating him on that topic? There was no possible indictment. There should have been no investigation.
Great point.
Well, by the way, following his statement yesterday, there was a joint statement released by the special counsel and the Justice Department saying that there is no daylight at all between Bill Barr and Bob Mueller. And it says the Attorney General has previously stated that the special counsel repeatedly affirmed that he was not saying that, but for the OLC opinion, he would have found the president obstructed justice. Obviously, like Mary said this morning, like you're saying now, it's hard not to leave with the impression that he was blaming the OLC opinion exclusively for why he didn't try to actually pursue an indictment.
Yeah, and that's something, that people are going to want to have people testify about. Barr's now going to have to testify further about this. I would suspect Congress is going to use this as an excuse to bring him in. And, Democrats have been hoping, this is the irony, to let Mueller come in and testify in private so they get some of this dirt onto the record without holding him fully accountable in the public domain. Now I think that's all out the window. Mr. Mueller is going to have to answer questions under oath in public, and he should. I always thought he should have been questioned by Congress a year ago over his judgments as the investigation's going along, his administration of the investigation. Now more questions can be asked.
I'm curious as to why so many people have come out on the right and said, oh, before this, Robert Mueller's a great guy. He's a stand-up guy. He's got a great record. He's going to do a great job. And they've really defended him. Why? And especially now when you see this, were their beliefs and their trust misplaced?
I never came out and defended him. I mean, I thought that was utterly ridiculous. His record didn't demonstrate that he was an apolitical saint. Judicial Watch uncovered that he was working, his FBI received the IRS files of virtually every group involved in politics because they were working with Lois Lerner's IRS to figure out ways with the DOJ under Barack Obama to prosecute these groups. The FBI had to return all those files because they weren't supposed to have them. Did that happen without Mueller knowing about it? He's as political as James Comey. It's pretty clear.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see where this goes. I'm looking forward to hearing the Attorney General's interviews today.
Yes, and we're grateful for Tom Fitton's analysis this morning. Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate it, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
6:23 now on WMAL.